Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands. In his final moments on the cross, amidst the utmost physical and spiritual agony, Jesus uttered a prayer full of trust. Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands. That prayer was not a cry of despair or defeat, but the pinnacle of love and absolute obedience. It was the word of a devoted son who, after completing every mission the Father had given, now peacefully returned to the Father's loving embrace. That whisper was like a river flowing back to its source, a journey back to a beloved old home. Jesus lived his entire life for the Father, and now he handed everything back into the Father's hands with unshakable faith. The Father's hands are not a judging power, but the gentle hands of a gardener ready to embrace, heal, and make new life sprout. It is a complete surrender without a hint of doubt, for he knew that no place was safer or warmer than the Father's embrace. This final prayer teaches us about a true love, a trust without conditions. It invites each of us, in times of hardship or when facing the limits of the human condition, to have the courage to entrust our lives to God. Because, as one author wrote, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act." Only when we dare to let go of our own burdens and place our complete trust in the Father can we find the peace and strength to overcome everything. The final prayer on the cross, "Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands," is not just the last words of a Savior, but also a great epic of trust. That whisper did not vanish into nothingness, but sowed living philosophical seeds in the heart of humanity, still echoing through all the ups and downs of history. It teaches us that amidst the limitations of human life, there is an absolutely safe refuge, a haven of endless peace. From that prayer, we can reflect on profound philosophies that guide the soul through a life full of turmoil. 1. True strength lies not in holding on, but in letting go with trust. Many people think strength is the ability to control everything, to brace oneself against adversity. But the greatest strength comes from daring to let go, not in despair, but in trusting a higher power that protects you. It is the strength of a river accepting its merge with the sea. One afternoon, as the boat was tossed about in a great storm on the Sea of Galilee, the terrified apostles woke Jesus. Peter shouted, "Teacher, we are going to die, don't you see?" Jesus calmly looked at him, then at the fierce waves, and said, "Peter, do you think your strength is for rowing this boat through the storm? No, your true strength is to hold fast to the faith that my Father holds you, the boat, and this storm in his hands. Be calm." 2. The end of an earthly journey is the beginning of an eternal return. Death is not the end, but a door. It is not disappearance, but a return home after a long journey. Just as a seed must decay in the earth to sprout into a new rice plant, the soul returns to the source that gave it birth to begin a new, more complete life. When Lazarus died, Martha wept before Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus looked into her tear-filled eyes and said gently, "Martha, your brother is not dead, only sleeping. Do you believe that the life the Father gives does not end in this tomb? It only changes. This tomb is not the end, but the threshold for Lazarus to return to the Father's house." 3. The greatest freedom is liberation from fear of the future. We are often shackled by worries about tomorrow. What will we eat? What will we wear? What will happen? Complete surrender breaks these chains. When we believe we are cared for by a providential love, we find the freedom to live fully in the present moment. A crowd surrounded Jesus on a hill, their faces filled with anxiety. A man asked, "Teacher, we labor hard yet always fear scarcity. What should we do?" Jesus pointed to the sky where birds were flying and said, "Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Do not imprison yourselves in the jail of tomorrow. Entrust those worries to the Father and you will be free to soar like the birds of the air. 4. The value of a soul is not measured by what it possesses, but by the love that embraces it. The world judges people by their wealth, fame, and power. But before God, our value lies in being His children. Realizing that we are always in the Father's loving embrace is the greatest source of dignity, which nothing can take away. In the temple courtyard, Jesus and His disciples saw many rich people putting large suits into the offering box. Then a poor widow came and put in only 2 small coins. Matthew whispered, "That amount is truly insignificant." Jesus turned to him and said, "Matthew, do not look at the number of coins. Look at the heart. The rich give from their surplus, but this widow has given all she had to live on. She has placed her entire worth not in money but in the Father's providence. In the Father's eyes, she is the richest of all." 5. Peace is not the absence of trials, but the presence of God amidst trials. Many people seek a life without difficulties, without storms. But true peace is not an external circumstance, but an internal state. It is the firm belief that even when the seas of life are raging, the anchor of our soul is held fast in God. John, a young apostle, asked Jesus as they passed through a barren land, "Teacher, why does the Father allow such harsh places to exist? How can one find peace here?" Jesus bent down, picked up a hot pebble and said, "Peace is not fertile land or cool springs, John. Peace is when you walk through this desert still believing that a stream of living water is flowing in your heart, a stream that comes from the Father. Where that faith exists, even the desert blossoms." 6. The highest obedience stems not from fear but from love. One may follow rules for fear of punishment, but the obedience most pleasing to God is the voluntary obedience of a child who loves their father, wants to please him, and trusts absolutely in his wisdom. A Pharisee challenged Jesus, "You and your disciples do not keep the law as strictly as we do." Jesus replied, "Do you keep the law for fear of God's punishment or out of love for Him? Does a son obey his father's words out of love and trust or for fear of the rod? I have not come to teach you to fear the Heavenly Father, but to love Him. When you love your Father, doing His will becomes a joy, not a burden." 7. In God's silence, man's faith speaks most powerfully. There are times when we pray and there seems to be no answer. When life is so dark, it feels as if God has abandoned us. It is in this silence that our entrustment is tested and purified. To trust in the Father's presence even when we cannot feel Him is mature faith. After being rejected by the people of Nazareth, Andrew said sadly to the Lord, "Teacher, we preach God's word, but they do not listen." It seems the Father is silent. Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Andrew, when night falls, do you believe the sun still exists?" The Father's silence is sometimes an invitation for us to stop seeking external signs and to listen to the voice of faith deep within. It is in the darkest night that the stars shine most brightly. 8. Every act of giving is a step closer to the Father. Surrender is not just an act at the hour of death, but a life attitude practiced daily. Every time we forgive others, every time we give without counting the cost, every time we sacrifice our own will for a greater good, we are practicing entrusting our soul into the Father's hands. A woman who was saved from being stoned knelt at Jesus' feet and asked, "What must I do to repay you?" Jesus helped her up and said, "I do not need your repayment, but every time you see a hungry person and give them a piece of bread, every time you see a thirsty person and give them a cup of water, every time you forgive someone who has harmed you, you are entrusting a small part of your soul into the hands of the Heavenly Father. Live this way, and in the end you will find you have been in His embrace all along without realizing it. 9. Wounds can become windows for God's light to shine through. It is in our most broken, painful, and weakest moments that our proud ego is shattered. Only then do we open our hearts to receive a greater strength. Complete surrender often arises from a deep awareness of our own powerlessness. The Apostle Thomas, after touching the wounds of the risen Lord, exclaimed, "My Lord and my God." Jesus looked at him lovingly. "Thomas, you have believed because you have seen my wounds, but blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Remember, it is through these wounds that the Father's glory is revealed. Do not be afraid of the wounds in your life, for they may be the very places where the Father's light will shine most powerfully into your soul. 10. The journey of faith is learning to call God Father with one's entire life. The prayer Father is the core of everything. It is not just a title but a relationship. To live a life of surrender is to live fully that filial relationship. Trusting like a child, loving unconditionally, and resting in His presence. The entire life becomes a continuous calling of Father. When the disciples asked Jesus to teach them to pray, He began, "When you pray, say, 'Our Father in heaven.'" Philip asked, "Teacher, is that all?" Jesus smiled. "Everything is in that address, Philip. When you truly call God Father with all your heart, you will know how to entrust everything to Him. You will no longer be afraid because no one fears a loving Father. From now on, let your lives be a response to that gentle call." 11. The soul is like clay. Surrender is the act of allowing the divine potter to mold a masterpiece. We often try to shape our own lives, to sculpt our own identity and destiny. But the potter's hands know the most beautiful form the clay can become. To give ourselves to the Father is to accept that the molding, sometimes painful, is necessary for us to become the noblest version of ourselves. Jesus and James passed by a potter's workshop. They silently watched the potter patiently working with a formless lump of clay on the wheel. James said, "Teacher, that clay is so soft and passive." Jesus replied, But see, it is through that softness and passivity that it is becoming a useful vessel. My Father is also a potter. Your life is the clay. Do not resist His hands. Let Him turn you into a vessel filled with grace." 12. Surrender means freeing those who have hurt us, because we trust that ultimate justice belongs to God. Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. When we place judgment in the Father's hands, we not only free them, but more importantly, we free ourselves from the burden of hatred. We trust that the Father sees all things and will act with justice and mercy. Peter approached Jesus with an angry look. "Teacher, the Roman soldiers have treated our people unjustly. I can never forget." Jesus looked deep into his eyes. "Peter, why do you hold that anger in your heart? Does it burn you or them? Entrust those injustices to the Father. Your job is to love and forgive. The Father's job is to discern and heal. Do not do the Father's job, do your job well." 13. True entrustment is not a single act, but the very breath of the soul. We do not only surrender in moments of extreme danger. Surrender is practiced in every small choice of daily life, in how we face criticism, how we accept a sudden change, how we start a new day. It becomes a natural reflex of a heart accustomed to resting in God. One morning, Jesus saw Mary Magdalene praying. He asked her, "What are you asking the Father for?" Mary replied, "I am not asking for anything specific, teacher. I am just practicing breathing. I breathe in His presence and breathe out my worries, entrusting them to Him. I want every breath I take to be an act of surrender." Jesus nodded. "That is the most beautiful prayer, Mary." 14. Emptiness is not to be feared. It is the necessary space for God to fill. Humans fear emptiness, loneliness, and the feeling of meaninglessness. We try to fill it with work, entertainment, and relationships. But surrender is daring to face our own emptiness and inviting the Father to come and fill it with His very presence. Only He is true fulfillment. A rich young man came to Jesus and asked how to gain eternal life. After hearing Jesus' advice to sell all his possessions, he went away sad. Jesus watched him go and said to his disciples, "He is afraid of emptiness. He fears that if he gives away his wealth, he will have nothing left. But he does not understand that only when your hands are empty can the Father place the treasures of the kingdom of heaven in them." 15. God's will is not a detailed map, but a compass. We often want God to show us every step, every turn, but He usually shows us the right direction, the direction of love, truth, and mercy. To surrender is to trust that compass and to walk courageously in the fog, knowing that as long as we are heading in the right direction, we will reach our destination safely. Thomas asked Jesus, "Where are you going, and how can we know the way?" Jesus replied, "Thomas, I do not leave you a map with every road drawn out. I leave you a compass in your heart. It is love. Whenever you act out of love, you are on the right path home to the Father. Trust its direction even when you cannot see the road ahead clearly." 16. To surrender is to believe in the harvest even when sowing in tears. There are periods in life when our efforts seem futile, when kindness is met with ingratitude. To surrender is to continue sowing seeds of love and kindness, believing that no good deed is forgotten in the Father's eyes, and that the harvest of joy will surely come in His time. A farmer lamented to Jesus, "Teacher, I work hard on this land, but this year there is a drought and I might lose everything." Jesus bent down, took a handful of dry soil and said, "You only see what is on the surface, but the Heavenly Father sees the seeds that are silently waiting under the ground. Your duty is to sow. The duty of the rain belongs to the Father. Do not lose hope. Keep believing in the harvest." 17. To love is to entrust oneself to another. Every time we truly love someone, we are practicing surrender. We give them our time, our attention, and even the power to hurt us. Human love is an excellent school where we learn to entrust our soul on a small scale in preparation for the complete surrender to God. Jesus said to His disciples, "They say loving God is the most important thing. That is true, but how do you know you love God whom you cannot see? By the way you love your brother, whom you see every day, when you dare to give love without demanding anything in return, when you serve others without expecting reward, you are practicing the noblest lesson, the lesson of surrender." 18. Surrender transforms passive waiting into a sacred act. Waiting is often seen as dead time, a waste. But in the spiritual life, waiting is a discipline. To surrender in waiting is to trust that God is working in silence, that a delay is not a denial, and that our soul is being prepared for what is to come. In the Garden of Gethsemane, while the disciples slept, Jesus prayed alone. He did not ask the Father to change His fate, but waited in obedience. When He returned to find the disciples sleeping, He did not scold them, but said gently, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He understood that even waiting for 1 hour is a test of faith, an act of surrender that requires strength. 19. True courage is not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of fear, because you believe a hand is holding you. Many heroes of faith also felt fear. The difference is they did not let fear control them. They looked through the fear to see the Father's embrace. Surrender is not insensitivity, but the choice to trust something greater than a fleeting emotion. Before sending the disciples out to preach, Jesus clearly saw the anxiety in their eyes. Nathanael asked, "Teacher, we will be persecuted and driven out. What should we do with this fear?" Jesus answered, "I do not tell you not to be afraid. I tell you not to let fear win. When you are afraid, remember that it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Courage is not your strength, but the presence of the Father in you." 20. The peace that comes from surrender is not the stillness of a stagnant pond, but the flow of a river. Peace is not a static, unchanging state. It is a dynamic, flowing peace ready to adapt to any circumstance. Like a river flowing around boulders, a surrendered soul will find its way through all obstacles without losing its inner peace. Jesus and his disciples sat by the Jordan River. He asked, "What does this river teach you?" Andrew replied, "It always flows forward." Jesus said, "That's right, and it never fights against the rocks. It just gently flows around them. The peace the Father gives is like that. It does not remove difficulties, but it gives you the strength to move through them flexibly. Let your souls flow like this river, always heading towards the sea, which is the Father." 21. To surrender is to give up the right to understand, in order to accept being loved. The human mind always wants to analyze, to understand why things happen. But there are sufferings, paradoxes that are beyond our comprehension. To surrender is to accept that we do not need to understand all of the Father's plans. We just need to believe that those plans are woven from love. Nicodemus came to Jesus at night and asked about the kingdom of heaven, with many logical questions. "How can a man be born again?" Jesus replied, "The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit." Nicodemus, do not try to grasp the kingdom of heaven with your mind. Open your heart to be enveloped by the Father's love, and then understanding will follow. 22. Every yes in life is a note in the symphony of surrender. Surrender is not a negative capitulation, it is an active yes, an agreement with the will of God. The life of Mother Mary is a testament to this. Every yes in the face of uncertainty was an act that contributed to a life of complete trust. When speaking to the crowd about faith, a woman praised his mother. Jesus took the opportunity to say, "Blessed rather are those who hear the word of God and obey it." He was not belittling his mother, but elevating the principle by which she lived. It is the surrendering yes to the word of God that is the source of true blessing, a lesson that anyone can follow. 23. Surrender heals the past by placing it in God's mercy. We cannot change what has happened, but we can change how we carry it. Holding on to mistakes and regrets is a burden. To surrender is to courageously place the entire past with both its successes and failures into the Father's mercy, trusting that He can bring good even from our mistakes. The sinful woman came, washed his feet with her tears, and anointed them with perfume. The Pharisee was contemptuous, but Jesus said, "Her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown." He turned to the woman and said, "Your past has been placed back into the Father's hands. Do not carry it anymore. Go and live a new life, light and free." 24. When we surrender, we do not lose ourselves. We find our true selves. The greatest fear in surrendering is the fear of losing our identity, our ego. But paradoxically, the self we try to hold on to is often just a shell made of fear and pride. When we dare to let it go, we discover the true person God created, a person who is free, loving, and full of life. Jesus said to the crowd, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it." A man asked, "What does it mean to lose one's life?" Jesus replied, "It means you dare to give up the person the world wants you to be, to become the person the Father wants you to be. That is not death, but rebirth." 25. To surrender is to see the world not with our own eyes, but with the eyes of the Father. Our eyes often see only chaos, injustice, and meaninglessness. But when we choose to surrender, we borrow God's perspective. We begin to see providence in every detail, to see hope in the midst of despair, and to recognize a great, loving order governing the universe. The disciples looked at the crowd of 5,000 and saw an unsolvable problem. Not enough food. They looked with eyes of limitation. But Jesus looked at the crowd and saw an opportunity for the Father to reveal his power. He said to the disciples, "You give them something to eat." He invited them to look at the problem with the eyes of faith, surrendering to the Father's provision, even starting with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. 26. Surrender does not protect us from pain, but it gives pain meaning. A life of trust is not a life without suffering. The cross is the clearest proof, but surrender transforms pain from a meaningless punishment into a crucible, an opportunity for purification, to share in the Lord's passion and to bear spiritual fruit. A man who had leprosy for a long time came to be healed by Jesus. He did not demand, but simply said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Those words contained a wonderful surrender. He did not ask, "Why must I suffer this pain?" but placed his pain under God's will. Jesus, moved with compassion, touched him and said, "I am willing. Be clean." He showed that the Father does not want suffering, but when it happens, surrender can turn it into a meeting point with grace. 27. The greatest act of surrender is to forgive oneself. We often find it easier to forgive others than to forgive ourselves. We torment ourselves for our weaknesses and mistakes. To surrender to the Father also means to believe that His mercy is greater than our own judgment. Accepting God's forgiveness is the ultimate act of humility and trust. After denying the teacher 3 times, Peter wept bitterly. He could not forgive himself. But after the resurrection, by the seashore, Jesus did not bring up his sin. He only asked 3 times, "Peter, do you love me?" By doing so, he gave Peter a chance to start over, to accept that the teacher's love was greater than his betrayal. He taught him how to surrender even his sinful weakness to mercy. 28. To surrender is to choose joy over happiness. Happiness often depends on external conditions, health, success, the affection of others, but the joy that comes from surrender is a spring that flows from within, independent of circumstances. It is the deep joy of knowing one belongs to the Father and nothing can change that. Paul and Silas, though beaten and chained in prison, sang hymns to God. They did not have happiness, but they had joy. Jesus taught this to his disciples when he said, "I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete." His joy came from his intimate union with the Father, a joy that the world cannot give and cannot take away. 29. Surrender turns endings into new beginnings. People fear closed doors, a lost job, a broken relationship, the end of an era. But a surrendered soul believes that every time the Father closes a door, it is to open another, wider one. The end on the cross opened the door to the glorious resurrection. When Jesus told his disciples about his impending departure, they were deeply saddened. They only saw the end of their beautiful days with the teacher. But the Lord said, "It is for your good that I am going away. Unless I go away, the Advocate will not come to you." He taught them that the ending they were seeing was the necessary condition for a new beginning, a new era of the Spirit. 30. The final prayer. I entrust my spirit is not a farewell, but an invitation. It is not an act reserved only for Jesus. It is an invitation to all of humanity. He walked the path of surrender first to show us that it is the path that leads to true life. Each of us in our own time is invited to utter that prayer with our entire lives. On the cross, next to Jesus, there was a thief. He had nothing to offer, no merits to boast of. In his final moments, all he could do was a simple act of surrender. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus replied, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. The prayer of surrender, however late, opened the door to eternity. That is the promise and invitation for all of us. 31. The Father's will is not a rigid concrete road, but a flowing river. To surrender is to get into the boat and trust the current, instead of trying to steer the entire river. We often imagine God's will as a detailed plan, and we are afraid of straying from it. But God's will is much more flexible and alive. Surrender is not following a rigid script, but learning to flow with the current of grace, trusting that whether through winding curves or rough rapids, the river always flows to the ocean of the Father's love. Sitting by the Jordan River, Jesus asked his disciples, have you ever seen the river flow backward? Simon the Zealot replied, no, teacher, it always flows down to the Dead Sea. Jesus said, the Father's will is the same, it always flows towards life. Do not try to build a dam to stop it or dig a canal to steer it your way. Have the courage to launch the boat of your life into it. There will be times when the current is calm and times when it is strong, but trust that it always knows the way home. 32. Life is like the underside of an embroidered tapestry. To surrender is to trust that the weaver is creating a beautiful picture on the top side. Seen from our side, life is often a chaotic mess of colorful threads, incomprehensible knots, and meaningless stitches. We cannot see the whole picture. Surrender is the firm belief that a divine artist is at work, and every thread of suffering or joy has its place in a masterpiece that we will one day behold. Jesus visited the home of two sisters, Mary and Martha, as they were weaving. He looked at the underside of the cloth where the threads were tangled and chaotic and said, "It looks confusing, doesn't it?" Martha nodded. Jesus smiled. "But look at the top side." A picture of a field of flowers was emerging in vibrant color. Your lives are like that too. You are on the underside. Just trust in the hands of the weaver, my Father. He never makes a mistake. 33. God's silence is not absence, but an invitation to listen more deeply. When we face difficulties and our prayers are met with silence, it's easy to think we've been abandoned. But that silence is not a wall. It's a space. It invites us to go beyond the noisy words of our mind and fears, to listen to the Father's whisper in the depths of our heart, where He is always present. The prophet Elijah of old did not find God in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in a gentle whisper. Recalling this story, Jesus said to His bewildered disciple, "You are looking for an answer from the Father in great signs. But the Father often speaks in the sentence. When you feel the Father is sentient, that is when He wants you to be sent with Him, so your hearts can hear what your ears cannot." 34. To surrender is to exchange the anxiety of what if for the peace of even if. Our minds are constantly tormented by hypotheticals. What if I hadn't failed? What if that person were still alive? Surrender helps us to switch. Instead of dwelling on the past, we face the present and future with a firm faith. Even if I am weak, the Father is strong. Even if I am lost, the Father is the way home. A father whose child was gravely ill came to Jesus full of despair. He said, "If only you had come sooner." Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Do not live in if only. Live in even if. Say to the Father in heaven, 'Father, even if I don't understand, I still trust. Even if I am in pain, I still surrender.' Peace lies there, not in changing the past." 35. A surrendered soul is like an enclosed garden. unaffected by comparisons. The greatest human insecurity comes from comparing our lives to others. We look at their success, talent, happiness, and feel inadequate. To surrender is to trust that the Father has a unique and wonderful plan for each person. When we know we are being cared for in the Father's garden, we no longer covet the flowers in our neighbor's garden. John and James asked to sit at Jesus' left and right in his kingdom, an act born of comparison and ambition. Jesus taught them, "That is not for me to grant, but understand this. A gardener never expects a rose bush to bear figs." Each plant has its own beauty and value in the gardener's eyes. Do not compare, blossom in the way the Father has intended for you. 36. True rest is not doing nothing, but ceasing the internal resistance. We can rest our bodies while our minds are still in turmoil. The rest that Jesus gives is not laziness, but the end of the inner battle. It's when we stop fighting against the Father's will, stop struggling with what we cannot change, and accept flowing with the current of grace. Jesus said to the weary crowd, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." A person asked, "But we still have to work, we still have to worry, don't we?" Jesus replied, "The heaviest burden is not on your shoulders, but in your minds. It is the burden of resistance. Give that burden to me. Learn to work in peace, not in stress. That is true rest." 37. To surrender is to let go of the need for worldly recognition, to live in the acceptance of God. Most of our actions are driven by the desire to be praised, loved, and recognized by others. This is an invisible prison. Surrender is an act of liberation. When we know our value lies in being the Father's beloved child, the praise and criticism of the world become secondary. The scribes and Pharisees did everything to be seen by others. Jesus pointed to them and said to his disciples, "Sir, they have received their reward in full. They sought human recognition and they have received it. But you, when you pray, go into your room and close the door. When you do a good deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Seek recognition from the Father who sees what is done in secret. His acceptance is the only freedom." 38. The holiness of surrender is found in embracing the ordinary, believing that the Father is present in every small detail. We often look for God in extraordinary events and spectacular spiritual experiences. But most of the time, He is present in a family meal, in daily work, in a kind conversation. To surrender is to recognize the sacred in the mundane and to do everything with great love. As a young man in Nazareth, Jesus worked in Joseph's carpentry shop. A neighbor asked, "Young man, aren't you tired of planing wood every day?" Jesus smiled and replied, "In every grain of this wood I see the Father's hand. In every table I build I see a place for a family to gather." No work is small when it is done with love for the Father and for one's brothers and sisters. 39. Surrender is like planting a tree whose shade you may never get to enjoy. It is an act of faith in the future, an investment in the next generation. It transcends personal and short-sighted interests. When we do good without needing to see immediate results, when we build something lasting for our descendants, we are practicing surrender to God's long-term plan. An old man was diligently planting a young olive tree. A Roman soldier passed by and mocked, "Hey, old man, you won't live long enough to eat the fruit of this tree." The old man looked up and replied gently, "My ancestors planted trees for me to eat their fruit. Now, I plant trees for my descendants. I am not planting for myself. I am planting in trust of God's caring hand, who nurtures both me and this tree." Jesus, upon hearing this story, recounted it to his disciples as a lesson in selfless faith. 40. A surrendered soul does not ask, "What do I want from this moment?" but asks, "What does this moment require of me?" The first attitude comes from the ego, always seeking to extract and control. The second comes from humility and a readiness to serve. To surrender is to realize that every moment is a gift and an invitation from God, and our duty is to respond to that invitation with love and obedience. When the Samaritan woman came to the well, she only wanted to draw water for her own needs. But Jesus turned that moment into an invitation. He did not ask for water for himself. He asked in order to give living water. He showed her how to shift from the question, "What do I want?" to the question, "What is God offering me, and what does He want me to do in this moment?" 41. To surrender is the humility to accept help, acknowledging that we cannot do everything alone. Pride often makes us want to prove we are strong and independent. But true surrender recognizes our own weakness and sees help from others as a channel of God's grace. Daring to open our hearts to receive is also an act of trust. On the way to Calvary, Jesus fell under the weight of the cross. They forced Simon of Cyrene to help carry it. At first, Simon was probably reluctant, but Jesus accepted that help with gratitude. He showed the disciples that even the Son of God needed human help. Acknowledging our need for others is to acknowledge the Father's providence working through them. 42. The soul is like a sail. It is strongest when it is empty and stretched to catch the wind. A sail filled with clutter cannot catch the wind. A soul filled with its own plans, fears, and self-satisfaction cannot receive the power of the Holy Spirit. To surrender is to clear the soul, to empty it, so that the Spirit of the Father can blow into it and take the boat of our life far. Looking at the fishing boats on the lake, Jesus said to the apostles who were fishermen by trade, "You see, a boat cannot move on its own. It needs wind. Your souls are the same. Do not try to row with your own strength. Learn to raise the sail of your faith, empty it of worries, and let the wind of the Father take you to places you never expected." 43. To surrender is to believe that the Father's love is not a reward for perfection, but a remedy for imperfection. We often think we must become good and worthy before we dare to approach God. But the truth is the opposite. It is because we are imperfect, weak, and sinful that we need Him. To surrender is to run to the Father in our current state, believing that His arms are always open to heal, not to judge. When Zacchaeus, a sinful tax collector, climbed a tree to see Jesus, he did not think he was worthy, but Jesus looked up and called him by name. "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." Jesus did not wait for Zacchaeus to become perfect. He came to him while he was still a sinner. He showed that the Father's love is a gift, not a reward. 44. Surrender replaces the detailed map of life with a sure promise. I am with you. We crave a clear path, a guarantee for the future. But faith does not give us that. Instead, it gives us something far more precious: the constant presence of a companion. To surrender is to walk in the fog, not because we see the path clearly, but because we are holding the hand of the guide. Before ascending to heaven, Jesus did not leave His disciples a 10-year plan. He did not give them details about the difficulties they would face. Instead, He gave them a promise: "And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." That promise is more valuable than any map. It is the foundation of every act of surrender. 45. The more we surrender, the more we possess. The tighter we hold on, the more we lose. This is one of the great paradoxes of the spiritual life. When we try to hold on to money, fame, relationships, they are always at risk of slipping through our fingers. But when we offer those things to the Father, they are placed in an eternally safe place. We possess them in a new way, in freedom and gratitude, not in the fear of loss. Jesus taught, "Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail." This teaching is not just about charity. It speaks of a profound principle. The only thing we truly possess is what we have given away in love, what we have entrusted to the Father. Everything else is temporary. 46. Surrender transforms pain into compassion. Someone who has never suffered can hardly fully empathize with the pain of others. When we go through trials with surrender, our hearts become softer. Personal pain does not make us bitter. It opens our eyes to see our brothers and sisters who are also suffering. It transforms us from a victim into a healer. Jesus, who suffered all human pains, had infinite compassion. When he saw the crowds harassed and helpless, the Bible says, he had compassion on them. He did not look at them from above. He felt their pain. He taught his disciples that to serve others, their hearts must first be moved by the pain of their brethren. An ability gained only after tasting weakness in surrender. 47. To surrender is to choose to believe in the dawn, even in the darkest hour of the night. Faith is not denying the darkness. Faith is sitting in the darkness and being certain that the sun will rise. The final moments on the cross were the darkest hour. But the prayer of surrender was an act of professing faith in the dawn of the resurrection. When Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, it was night. When Peter denied the teacher, it was night. When the Lord breathed his last, darkness covered the land. The entire passion was shrouded in darkness. But Jesus had told his disciples beforehand, "The night is coming, but I am the light of the world." He taught that the believer's task is to keep the lamp of their faith burning, especially when the darkness is thickest, for that is the surest sign that dawn is about to break. 48. Surrender changes our identity from what I do to whose I am. The world defines us by our profession, achievements, and social roles. But those things can be lost. An identity built on surrender is much more durable. We are not a doctor, a carpenter, or a farmer first and foremost. First and foremost, we are the beloved child of the Father. Everything else flows from this foundational identity. When John the Baptist was asked, "Who are you?" he did not talk about his work. He replied, "I am not the Messiah." He defined himself by pointing to another. Jesus, when speaking of himself, always referred back to the Father. "By myself I can do nothing." He showed that true identity is not self-assertion, but a reference back to one's origin, which is God. 49. To surrender is to learn to love the questions instead of just seeking the answers. We often feel uncomfortable living with uncertainty, with unanswerable questions. To surrender is to live peacefully amidst mysteries. It is to trust that the journey of faith is not about accumulating answers, but about deepening the relationship with the one who is the answer to everything. The disciples frequently asked Jesus questions about the future, about rank, about rules. But Jesus often answered them with a parable, another question, or an action. He did not give them a formula. He invited them to walk with him in trust. He taught them that a loving heart will feel at peace in the Lord's presence, even when the mind is full of questions. 50. Ultimately, to surrender into the Father's hands is to find the way home. Every human journey, whether conscious or not, is a search for a home, a place where we truly belong. Jesus' prayer on the cross marked out the final path. That home is not a place, but a relationship, resting eternally in the loving embrace of God the Father. That is the destination of all surrender. The parable of the prodigal son summarizes it all. The younger son went seeking freedom and happiness in a distant country. But in the end, he realized his true home was where his father was waiting. His act of returning was an act of surrender. He did not know how he would be received, but he went anyway. And the father's arms, open to welcome him without a word of reproach, showed that the destination of every wandering journey is the heart of the Father. 51. An individual's surrender is a brick that builds a community of faith. When one person learns to trust the Father, they also learn to trust the journey of others. A community built on surrender is not a collection of perfect individuals, but a network of souls who are learning together to rely on the Father and on each other. Mutual trust arises from a common trust in God. When the disciples argued about who was the greatest, Jesus called a child and placed him in their midst. He said, "Unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." A child trusts its parents naturally. It does not compare, does not compete. A community that believes in my Father is the same. When each of you believes that the Father is caring for you, you will stop worrying about your own position and start caring for the person next to you. 52. To surrender is to give up the right to judge others, to make space for the Father's grace to work in them. When we judge someone, we close a box around them, label them, and limit them to their past mistakes. To surrender is to hand that box over to the Father, trusting that only He has the power and love to open it and transform what's inside. It frees us from the burden of being a judge and allows us to become an instrument of mercy. They brought to Jesus a woman caught in adultery, wanting Him to judge her. Instead, He bent down and wrote on the ground. When He stood up, He said, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." When everyone had left, He asked the woman, "Has no one condemned you?" She replied, "No, sir." He said, "Then neither do I condemn you. I entrust you to the Father's mercy. Go now and leave your life of sin." 53. A community of surrender is a hospital for sinners, not a museum for saints. A community that focuses too much on outward perfection becomes cold and exclusive. But a community that lives in surrender becomes a safe place where the broken, weak, and sinful can come to be healed without fear of condemnation. Everyone recognizes they are a patient, and the Father is the only physician. When Jesus ate with tax collectors and sinners, the Pharisees criticized His disciples. Jesus heard this and said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." My Father's kingdom is not a display of flawless vessels, but a place where broken pieces are put back together with love. 54. A surrendered soul learns to love the truth, even when the truth is painful. We often prefer sweet lies to the harsh truth, especially the truth about ourselves. To surrender is to trust that the Father loves us enough to show us the truth, not to hurt us, but to set us free. Accepting the truth about our weakness is the first step to receiving God's strength. After Jesus foretold His passion, Peter took Him aside and began to rebuke Him. Peter did not want to accept such a painful truth. But Jesus said to him sternly, "Get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." He taught that to love God is to accept the way of the cross, trusting that the path of truth, however thorny, is the path that leads to glory. 55. Surrender silences the voice of the inner critic and amplifies the whisper of the loving Father. Inside each of us is a voice that constantly criticizes, judges, and reminds us of our failures. That voice causes fear and paralysis. Surrender is a conscious choice to listen to another voice, the voice of the Father, who does not call us failures but calls us beloved child. A man haunted by past mistakes came to Jesus and said, "Teacher, I cannot escape the voice in my head that tells me I am unworthy." Jesus replied, "In a person's house there is the voice of the homeowner and the voice of the thief. The thief comes to shout, accuse, and steal peace. The homeowner speaks gently. You have listened to the thief's voice for too long. Learn to recognize your Father's voice. His voice always brings forgiveness and hope." 56. To surrender is to believe in the value of tiny seeds. The world often values only great deeds, big results. But the kingdom of heaven operates on a different logic. To surrender is to do the small things of love and kindness every day, trusting that the Father can make the smallest seeds grow into great trees that shelter many. Jesus said to the crowds, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree so that the birds come and perch in its branches." He taught not to despise a kind word, a small act of forgiveness. In the Father's hands, they have the power to change the world. 57. Surrender turns uncertainty from an enemy into a friend. Our instinct is to want to control and know everything in advance. Uncertainty frightens us, but a surrendered soul learns to live with uncertainty, even seeing it as a sacred space where the Father can create new and unexpected things far beyond what we could plan. When Jesus called the first disciples, they were doing their familiar work. He simply said, "Follow me." He did not give them a contract, a career path, or a guarantee of safety. He invited them into an uncertain future. Their act of leaving their nets was a great act of surrender, accepting that his companionship was more valuable than any worldly certainty. 58. To surrender is to choose gratitude even before the prayer is answered. Gratitude usually comes after we receive something, but the gratitude of faith comes first. It is gratitude for knowing that the Father is good and loving, regardless of the current circumstances. Thanking the Father in the midst of hardship is the most powerful profession of faith, before performing the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves. Jesus did not complain about having only 5 loaves and 2 fish. The scripture says, "He looked up to heaven, gave thanks, and broke the loaves." He thanked the Father for the little he had, and it was from that surrendered gratitude that the miracle occurred. He taught us that the key to receiving more is to be grateful for what we have. 59. To surrender is to realize that our will is like a small stream, and it only finds its meaning when it flows into the great river of God's will. A small stream trying to flow in its own direction will soon become stagnant and dry up, but when it merges with the great river, it becomes part of a mighty force flowing farther and bringing life to more places. Our own will is the same. When surrendered to the Father, it is not lost but elevated to a new level. Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." This prayer shows the struggle between the small stream and the great river. But in the end, surrender triumphed. He chose to merge with the flow of the Father's will, and that is what brought salvation to the whole world. 60. Surrender frees us from the burden of having to appear perfect. The world demands that we always be strong, wise, and never mistaken. This is a heavy mask. To surrender is to have the courage to take off that mask before the Father, admitting our weakness, our ignorance, and our limitations. Only then can the Father's strength and wisdom work through us. In the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, the Pharisee listed his perfect achievements. But the tax collector stood at a distance, beat his breast, and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." Jesus concluded, "I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God." He taught that the Father does not seek self-satisfied perfection, but humble surrender. 61. Surrender is the final declaration that love is stronger than death. On the cross, all the forces of evil, betrayal, violence, and death seemed to have triumphed. In that context, the prayer, "I entrust my spirit into your hands," was an act of defiance against them all. It was an affirmation that even when physical life ends, the loving relationship between the Son and the Father remains unshaken, and it is that love that has the final say. When Mother Mary and the other women stood at the foot of the cross, they were witnessing a total failure in the eyes of the world. But their presence there, in silence and pain, was also a form of surrender. They could not change the situation, but they could remain in love. Jesus, seeing his mother and the beloved disciple, entrusted them to each other, creating a community of love right under the shadow of death, as a sign that love will never be conquered. 62. To surrender is to realize that we are not the owners of life, but only its stewards. Life is a gift given to us to care for and make fruitful, not to possess and use for ourselves. A wise steward is one who always remembers his master. To surrender is to live each day with the awareness that this life, this time, these talents all belong to the Father, and one day we will have to account for how we have managed them. Jesus told the parable of the talents. The ones who received 5 and 2 talents put them to work and were praised. The one who received 1 talent buried it out of fear. Jesus taught that surrender is not passivity. It is the courageous act of investing the gifts the Father has given, trusting in his providence, not burying them for fear of failure or loss. 63. Surrender is not the resignation of the weak, but the patience of the strong. The world often confuses meekness and surrender with weakness. But in reality, to remain calm, not to seek revenge, to continue to love in the midst of provocation and injustice requires extraordinary inner strength. It is the strength that comes from knowing that the ultimate battle is not ours but the Lord's. When the soldiers came to arrest Jesus in the garden, Peter drew his sword and acted. That was the reaction of human strength. But Jesus stopped him and healed the wounded servant. He said, "Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" He showed that his choice not to use violence was not weakness, but a powerful patience, surrendering to the Father's plan. 64. Surrender transforms the bitter wise into hopeful for whats. When faced with suffering, our natural question is, why me? This question often leads to resentment and despair. Surrender does not always give us the answer to why, but it helps us move to another question. Father, what do you want me to learn from this? What fruit do you want this pain to bear? When the disciples saw a man blind from birth, they asked a why question. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus rejected that question and gave a for what answer. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. 65. To surrender is to let go of our own map to discover a new land that the Father has prepared. We often have a very clear plan for our lives, a path we think is best. To surrender is to dare to crumple up that map when the Father asks, and to trust that the path he leads us on, however rough and unfamiliar it may seem, will take us to a richer and more beautiful destination. Abraham is called the father of all who believe. The first call he received was an act of radical surrender. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. He went without knowing where he was going. He let go of the familiar map of his homeland in exchange for a promise. Jesus often referred to Abraham's faith as a model for all who wish to follow him. 66. To surrender to the Father also means to surrender to the community that the Father has given us. God often does not act alone. He acts through other people. To trust in the Father also means to dare to open our hearts to our brothers and sisters, to dare to trust in the wisdom of the community, to dare to receive support and even correction from them. Personal surrender is nurtured and protected within a community of surrender. After Jesus ascended to heaven, the apostles did not act individually. The Bible says they all joined together constantly in prayer along with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus. When they needed to make an important decision like choosing a replacement for Judas, they prayed together and surrendered to the Lord's guidance. Jesus established the church as a body where each member needs the others and they learn to surrender together. 67. Surrender transforms suffering from a meaningless end into a purifying crucible. Without faith, suffering is merely a negative event, something to be avoided at all costs. But in the furnace of surrender, suffering can become a catalyst. It burns away the dross in us like pride and selfishness, and makes qualities like patience, compassion, and faith pure as gold. In his letter, St. Peter, who learned this lesson profoundly, wrote, "In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith may result in praise, glory, and honor." This lesson originates from the very teaching and example of Jesus, who went through the crucible of the cross to bring salvation. 68. To surrender is to realize that control is an illusion, while connection is reality. We live under the illusion that we can control our health, our careers, and even the people around us. Surrender is an awakening that helps us realize the fragility of human life and the vanity of control. It invites us to shift our energy from trying to control to nurturing connection. Connection with the Father and connection with others. When Martha was busy and worried about her many tasks, she was trying to control the situation to make everything perfect. But Mary sat at the Lord's feet, nurturing connection. Jesus said to Martha, "You are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better." That better part is the loving connection, the foundation of a surrendered life. 69. A life of surrender leaves a legacy of faith, not just a list of accomplishments. When life ends, what we have built, what we have accumulated may vanish. But the faith we have sown in the hearts of others, the example of a trusting life we have lived, will continue to bear fruit. The greatest legacy is not what we leave behind, but what we have given away in faith. Jesus left no earthly kingdom, wrote no book, built no monument. His legacy was a small group of people who had learned to trust and love. And it was this legacy of faith that changed the world. He taught that the value of life is not in what we achieve, but in the flame of faith that we light and pass on. 70. Ultimately, surrender is love's response to love. Jesus' act of entrusting his spirit was not a legal transaction or a forced submission. It was the final breath in a lifelong dialogue of love between the Son and the Father. God is love, and he gave his only Son to the world. Our surrender, following Jesus' example, is the only fitting response, a complete act of trust, a total self-gift of love. At the Last Supper, Jesus said, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." The prayer on the cross is the pinnacle of that sacrifice. But it is not just a sacrifice for humanity. First and foremost, it is a self-offering to the Father. He showed that the entire journey of faith from beginning to end is essentially a love story. And in that story, the last word is always one of trust. 71. Surrender is like water. It does not fight the rock, but flows around it flexibly. Yet over time, it is the water that erodes and shapes the rock. The strength of surrender is not the strength of direct confrontation. It is the strength of persistence, flexibility, and endurance. Instead of bracing against the rigid obstacles of life, a surrendered soul learns to yield, to find the crevices of grace, and to trust that over time the gentleness of faith will overcome what seems unmovable. Jesus and his disciples stopped by a small stream trickling over large rocks. Peter said, "This water is so weak compared to those rocks." Jesus smiled and pointed to the soft curves on the stone. "Peter, do you see these marks? They are the imprint of water over thousands of years. Do not underestimate the power of gentleness. Your surrender is the same. It does not need to shatter the rock of difficulty immediately. It just needs to keep flowing in trust. In the end, it will reshape reality itself." 72. A surrendered soul is like good soil. It does not strive to grow, but simply receives the seed and lets life do its work. We often try too hard in our spiritual lives, trying to produce fruit. But surrender teaches us that our main role is to prepare the soil of our soul, to make it loose with humility, to pull out the weeds of pride and to receive the sun and rain of grace. The sprouting and growing is the work of the seed, which is the Father's word. When explaining the parable of the sower, Jesus spoke of the good soil as those who hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop. A farmer asked, "Teacher, how can my soil become good?" Jesus replied, "Go. You cannot force the grain to grow faster. You can only care for the soil. Worry less about producing fruit and focus on opening your heart to receive the Father's word each day. Let that word sink deep, and the fruit will be born of itself." 73. Surrender is breathing the air of grace, an act so continuous that we often forget we are doing it, until we feel suffocated. The Father's grace surrounds us at all times like the air we breathe. Surrender is the act of conscious breathing, recognizing that every moment of existence is a gift. When we try to live by our own strength, by our own air, we feel suffocated, anxious, and exhausted. The prayer of surrender is a deep breath returning to the infinite source of oxygen. On a hot summer afternoon, when everyone felt tired, Jesus said, "Are you conscious of every breath you take? Usually not. You just breathe naturally. The Father's love is the same, always surrounding you. Do not turn faith into a heavy task. Simply breathe in His presence. When you feel anxious, stop, take a deep breath, and remember that your life is in Him." 74. To surrender is to offer the Father not only our sorrows, but also our joys, recognizing He is the source of both comfort and celebration. We often turn to God only when we are in trouble, but a mature surrender knows to share moments of joy and success with Him as well. This acknowledges that every good thing comes from the Father, and joy is only complete when shared with the one who is the source of all joy. At the wedding at Cana, when the wine ran out, Mother Mary approached Jesus in trust. After the miracle happened and everyone was celebrating, Jesus took the disciple John aside and said, "See, people are celebrating and think this joy comes from good wine, but true joy comes from my Father's love and provision. Remember to bring to the Father not only the empty jars of your sorrows, but also the full cups of your joy. Let Him celebrate with you." 75. Hold the plans for your life loosely, like holding a butterfly in your palm. Squeeze too tight and you will kill it. Planning for the future is wise, but clinging rigidly to those plans is a sign of a lack of trust. Surrender allows the Father's Spirit to move freely, sometimes leading us down unexpected but better paths. Holding our plans loosely means being ready to open our hand to receive a greater plan. James and John, the sons of thunder, had ambitious plans. One day they presented Jesus with a detailed plan of how the kingdom of heaven should be established. Jesus listened and then asked, "Have you ever tried to hold a butterfly? If you grasp it tightly, you will crush its wings. Your plans are the same. Offer them to the Father and keep your hands open. Let His plan, as beautiful as a butterfly, be free to fly." 76. To surrender is to give up the need to write the final chapter of our life story, trusting that the Supreme Author will do it perfectly. Everyone wants a happy ending according to their own design. We try to control all the variables to ensure it. But surrender is an act of humility, acknowledging that we are just a character in a much larger story. We may write our own chapters, but the final chapter, the chapter on ultimate meaning and purpose, belongs to God. When the disciples asked Jesus about the end times and the final chapters of history, he did not give them a detailed answer. Instead, he said, "But about that day or hour no one knows, but only the Father." He taught them that the character's duty is not to worry about the ending, but to play their role well in the present act. Live in trust and let the author worry about the end of the story. 77. Surrender finds stability in the unchanging nature of God, not in our ever-changing circumstances. If our peace depends on our health, finances, or relationships, it will always be as precarious as a boat on the waves. But if our peace is anchored to the nature of the Father, who is faithful, loving, and almighty, then even when storms come, the boat will remain steady. To surrender is to move the anchor of the soul from the shifting sands of circumstance to the rock of God. Jesus ended the Sermon on the Mount with the parable of the two builders. The wise man built his house on the rock, the foolish man built on the sand. He said, "The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock." Jesus did not promise that the storm would not come. He promised that if your foundation is His word and trust in the Father, you will stand firm. Circumstances are the storm. The Father's nature is the rock. 78. Surrender is an act of love. It gives up the right to be right in an argument to protect the relationship, which is more important. Our ego craves to be proven right. We are willing to hurt others to win a debate. To surrender to the Father in relationships means to trust that harmony and love are more pleasing to Him than the pride of always being right. It is to entrust the truth and the final judgment to the Father. Two disciples were arguing heatedly on the road about a point of the law. Jesus approached and asked, "What are you arguing about?" They fell silent in shame. Jesus said, "Which of you is willing to lose this argument for the love of his brother? The kingdom of heaven is not built by those who are always right, but by those who know how to put love first. Entrust right and wrong to the Father and hold on to unity." 79. To surrender is to learn to celebrate the grace in other people's lives without envy. Envy is a sign of not trusting in the Father's provision for oneself. It stems from the thought that the Father's love is a limited resource. To surrender is to believe that the Father has enough grace for everyone, and the success or talent of others does not take away from our portion. It allows us to rejoice with our brothers and sisters' joy. In the parable of the workers in the vineyard, those who worked since morning were envious of those who worked only 1 hour but received the same pay. They did not trust in the master's generosity. Jesus used this parable to teach that the Father has the right to distribute His grace as He wishes. A surrendered soul will not ask, "Why did that person get more than me?" but will say, "Thank you, Father, for your generosity to all of us." 80. To surrender is to trust the Father's work in other people's lives, even when their path looks very different from ours. We have a tendency to impose our expectations and standards on others. When they don't live the way we think is right, we worry or judge. To surrender is to respect the mystery of each individual's journey with God, trusting that the Father is working in them in His own way. And our task is to love and pray for them, not to control them. The disciple John said to Jesus, "Teacher, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we told him to stop, because he was not one of us." "Do not stop him," Jesus said, "for whoever is not against us is for us." He taught an important lesson about surrender. Do not try to make everyone a copy of yourself. Trust that the Father has many ways of working, and His kingdom is larger than our small group. 81. True vision comes not from straining our eyes to see, but from closing them in prayer and trusting the Father to show the way. When facing a difficult decision, our instinct is to gather as much information as possible to analyze every option. This is the act of straining our eyes to see. But the wisdom of faith teaches us another way: silence, prayer, and listening to guidance from within. To surrender is to trust that the Father's light will shine when we stop relying on our own dim light. Before choosing the 12 apostles, a crucial decision that would shape the future of the church, the Bible records that Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. He did not form a committee to analyze. He closed his eyes to the world to open his heart to the Father. He showed that the greatest decisions are made in surrendered union, not in human calculation. 82. The highest act of self-love is to entrust oneself to the one who created it and knows its true worth. Self-love in the worldly sense is often about indulging the ego. But true self-love is recognizing that we are a precious creation of God and acting in accordance with that dignity. The best way to care for ourselves is to entrust ourselves to the Creator, who knows what we need and can heal our deepest wounds. Jesus said, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand." In this image, the best act of self-care for the sheep is to stay close to the shepherd. Entrusting oneself to the good shepherd is not to abandon oneself, but to place oneself in the only safe and loving place. 83. We are most fully ourselves not when we are independent, but when we are completely dependent on God. Modern culture glorifies independence and self-reliance, but in the spiritual life, the paradox is true. Like a vine branch, it can only be itself, a fruitful branch, when it is completely dependent on the vine. To be cut off from the vine in the name of independence is death. To surrender is to joyfully accept dependence on the Father, knowing that He is our source of life. Jesus used the parable of the vine and the branches to teach this lesson. I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. This dependence is not weakness, but an intelligent connection, the secret to an abundant life. 84. To surrender is not to lose freedom, but to discover what true freedom is for, to love and to serve. Many people fear that surrendering to God will make them lose their freedom, having to live by a set of rules. But the truth is, without God, we are often slaves to other masters: sin, pride, desire, fear. To surrender to the Father is a liberation from those chains, so that we are free to use our will for the highest purpose for which it was created. St. Paul, who understood this deeply, wrote, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free." Jesus also said, "If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." What is that truth? It is the truth that we are children of the Father, and the freedom of children is the freedom to love. 85. Surrender is the wisdom to know what is ours to change and what is ours to entrust. This is one of the most difficult discernments in life. There are times when we must act, fight for justice, and strive to improve our circumstances. But there are also times when we must accept our limitations and entrust the outcome to the Father. A surrendered soul is neither passive nor arrogant. It knows when to row and when to raise the sail. When they told Jesus that Lazarus was sick, he did not go immediately. He waited. That was an act of surrendering to the Father's timing, but when he arrived, he acted powerfully. He commanded them to roll away the stone and called Lazarus out of the tomb. He showed the perfect balance between surrendering to the Father's timing and acting decisively when that time comes. 86. A life of surrender creates ripples of grace that touch shores we will never see. Every act of trust, every prayer of surrender, every choice of love over fear does not just affect us. It creates a positive energy that spreads in the spiritual realm. We may never know how a small act of ours lifted the spirit of someone far away or contributed to a great plan of God. The widow of Zarephath, in a time of extreme famine, surrendered and used her last bit of flour to make a cake for the prophet Elijah. That act did not just save her and her son. The story has been told for thousands of years, becoming a source of inspiration for countless people. Jesus mentioned this story to show that a small act of surrender can have an eternal impact. 87. To live in surrender is to leave a light footprint on the earth, but a deep imprint in eternity. A life that chases fame and fortune often leaves a heavy carbon footprint, competition, stress, and hurt. In contrast, a life of surrender is lived simply, lightly, without clinging. But it is this lightness that carries weight in the kingdom of heaven. Its imprint is not in stone monuments, but in transformed hearts. Jesus taught, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The spirit of poverty is the spirit of surrender, not clinging to possessions or status. He also said, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." The meek and the poor leave a light footprint, yet they inherit everything. 88. To surrender is to exchange the temporary currency of human praise for the eternal treasure of the Father's well done. Human praise is like a currency that is valuable today, but may be worthless tomorrow. It is fleeting and unreliable. To build a life on it is a risky investment. Surrender is a long-term investment. It does everything for the love of the Father, with the sole hope of one day hearing the loving whisper, "Well done, good and faithful servant." In the parable of the talents, the reward for the faithful servants was not money. The reward was a deeper invitation into the relationship. Come and share your master's happiness. Jesus taught that the ultimate goal of all our efforts is not to receive human applause, but to share in the joy of the Father. 89. To live in surrender is to learn to live in Kairos, God's time, instead of being a slave to Chronos, clock time. Chronos is linear time, always passing, creating pressure of deadlines, age, and urgency. To live in Chronos is to be always rushing and anxious. Kairos is the opportune moment, the time of grace. To live in Kairos is to recognize that every moment can be an opportunity to encounter God and to trust that His timing is perfect. To surrender is to step out of the hasty flow of Chronos to dwell in the eternity of Kairos. When Mary and his brothers came looking for Jesus while He was teaching, they told Him. But He used that Chronos moment to teach a lesson about Kairos. Who is my mother and who are my brothers? For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. He showed that spiritual relationships are more important than the bonds of time and blood. 90. To surrender is to realize that every step on earth, when taken in faith, is a step closer to the Father's embrace. The journey of faith is not just a preparation for a future in heaven. It is an experience of the kingdom of heaven here on earth. Every act of love, every choice to forgive, every moment of prayer is a step deeper into the Father's presence. Earthly life is not a waiting room but a dance, where we learn the steps to be able to dance fully with the Father in eternity. When the two disciples on the road to Emmaus walked with the risen Jesus without recognizing Him, they were walking on an earthly road. But when He explained the Scriptures to them, their hearts burned within them. In that moment, the dusty road became a sacred space. Jesus showed that He can turn any earthly journey into a divine encounter, and every step can be a step closer to home. 91. The final surrender is not a leap into the dark, but a joyful fall into an ocean of light. Seen from the outside, death and complete letting go look like a terrifying end, a leap into the unknown. But from the perspective of faith, it is the most awaited moment. It is when the soul, like a drop of water, finally returns to its source, the ocean, not to be dissolved, but to become part of the vastness of infinite light and love. When St. Stephen was being stoned, he did not see the darkness of hatred. The Bible says he looked up to heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And his final words were a prayer of surrender. Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Like his master, he showed that for the believer, death is not a slamming door, but a wide open gate into the brilliant presence of God. And so our contemplative journey through the 91 philosophies on Jesus' prayer of surrender, Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands, comes to a close. We have discovered together that this is not just a prayer in the final moments on the cross, but truly a compass, an art of living for our entire lives. From the waves on the Sea of Galilee to the tiny mustard seeds, from the image of the potter to the parable of the vine, each reflection has opened a path for us. A path to let go of the burdens of anxiety, fear, and control. A path to find true freedom, inner peace, and a joy that does not depend on circumstances. A path to return, to rest, and to realize that our greatest value lies in being the beloved child of the Father. Jesus in Me invites you not to stop at just listening. Let these contemplative seeds grow in the soil of your own soul. In the comments below, we would love to hear your sharing. Throughout this journey, which philosophy or image has touched your heart most deeply? Your sharing can be a source of encouragement and enlightenment for others in our community. And more importantly, choose one thing that resonated with you the most and practice that small act of surrender this week. Perhaps it's surrendering a worry, forgiving someone, or simply taking a few minutes each day to breathe in the Father's presence. If you found this program helpful and spiritually valuable, please help Jesus and Me spread this message by clicking the like button and sharing this video with your friends and family. And if this is your first time to the channel, don't forget to press the subscribe button and the notification bell icon so you won't miss our future deep reflection programs. Once again, Jesus and Me sincerely thanks all of you for listening and journeying with us. May you always find strength, hope, and boundless peace as you courageously say to the Lord each day, Father, I entrust my life into your hands, 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 into your hands.